Hey there, welcome to the NFL DFS build. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We're going to break down the Week 3 main slate over at DraftKings. Hopefully help you win some money. If we do help you in any way, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. You can also hit up the Thursday Night Football DFS Showdown build video, which is at the end of this video or just at our channel page. Either way, give us a like and subscribe. All that stuff helps us and also helps you get alerted to future videos just like this. We're going to go break this thing down position by position, starting with quarterback, where you got to get somebody decent, because I swear every single lineup that does well, and then when it gets a takedown in NFL DFS, has a quarterback that has like 30 fantasy points pretty much every time. So you can't miss the quarterback position, and that's why people like to pay up sometimes. So speaking to that, Taylor, we have 3 quarterbacks priced at 7.1 or more in Week 3: Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, CJ Stroud. Before we really get into ownership or projections, are you entertaining being highly exposed to any of those 3 dudes?
I am not.
End of conversation. Yeah, I mean,
think Hurts would be the best of the 3 because
yeah.
of the obvious touchdown equity. Even with Barkley there, they still use him around the goal line, and it's a dome against the Saints. I guess all 3 of these are domes: Stroud, Jackson, and Hurts, but
Yeah.
really not getting to any of them, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm with you on if you were going to pay for one, it would definitely be Hurts and then Lamar. I think Stroud is just obviously not going to allow the same rushing floor that those 2 guys are going to give you. Also, Minnesota has been pretty darn good defensively through the first 2 weeks. Obviously, shutting down the Giants means nothing, but they did limit the 49ers, considerably. So is CJ Stroud just going to go into Minnesota and just like wipe the floor with the Vikings? Maybe not. And also, he's the 3rd most expensive quarterback on the slate. So for tournaments, you can always play CJ Stroud, and you can stack up the Texans all you want. I'm sure you, as a Houston boy, want to do that to some degree, but I don't think he's a good play technically. And Lamar and Hurts are just expensive, and I don't think that's how we have to spend our funds. Which, by the way, the Saints defense has also been really good. And then Lamar and the Ravens, just something's missing so far, as they are 0-2. But honestly, all 3 of those games could be shootouts. So it's certainly worth noting. But I'm with you. Don't really want to spend up, especially when we have other guys who are not that far behind in the projection. So the first guy that is right there is going to be Anthony Richardson, 3rd best projection of the slate, and he's considerably cheaper than Lamar and Hurts, and he's also coming in with less ownership. And then right behind him is Kyler Murray, who is $200 more, about the same projection, and is a little bit more owned. So going into that tier of price range, and I guess you have Dak Prescott a little bit ways down. Are you interested in those guys, or are you looking more at like a punt at quarterback?
Yeah, I'm really not paying at quarterback as of now. It's Thursday afternoon, so subject to change, but the QB in that range, other than Hurts, that I have the most exposure to is Dak. I think it's just because it's a close game total. Another dome game at home against the Ravens. Ravens have looked a little bit vulnerable so far, which is to be expected. They lost some guys on defense. They lost their coordinator, of course, to the Seahawks. So I think there's potential for regression there, and there should be the good kind of regression for Dallas, I think, moving forward. So I don't think Dak's a bad play. Richardson, not a lot of interest there against Chicago. Kyler Murray, not a good match against a lot at home in the dome either. So I guess Dak would be my favorite, but even he's not someone I'm going to be building around necessarily.
Yeah, Bears are another tough matchup that I'm not super excited about. I do like Kyler Murray. If I'm going to pay up at quarterback, Kyler is probably going to be the guy I go pay for. But I think we can get a lot better value on the slate at quarterback. And the number one value, in my opinion, is actually going to be Brock Purdy, just because I think the matchup is really, really good. The Rams are 4th worst against fantasy quarterbacks on the year. Purdy does lose some options. Obviously, C-Mac is still out. Deebo Samuel may not play in this game, but he still has a lot of weapons and a great system and an awesome matchup. At 6K flat, I think Purdy looks awesome. He's really not that far off from these other guys with the top projections, coming in with a 20-point fantasy projection and not that much ownership. How do you feel about Purdy?
Love him. Loved him last week. He was only mediocre. I mean, he was okay. I think he had like 18 fantasy points, but
yeah,
even without Deebo, like, still has a lot of great weapons at its disposal. It does make the stack cheaper if Deebo is out. Obviously, McCaffrey being gone makes them a lot cheaper. Even with Jordan Mason getting a price boost, he's still too cheap. So we're going to be talking about him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I just think it's a great spot in a dome against the Rams. The Rams defense, like you said, not as good anymore. No Aaron Donald. Niners are favored on the road. Yeah, I love everything about it. He's my second highest owned QB as of now.
Nice. We are aligned on Brock Purdy. That's nice. All right. So going down here, I actually do like Jared Goff a little bit. I don't love the price at 6.5K, but the Cardinals are another team that's given up a lot of production to quarterbacks. So if I go up and stay in that range, I'm not probably going to Dak. I'm going Purdy because he's just cheaper. And then Goff, I think, I mean, he's really not that owned, almost 6% ownership, but that's relative to the slate. It looks pretty like split. So I do like Goff quite a bit. I'm seeing Geno Smith as mega chalk. Are you buying into Geno this week?
I like him a good amount. I think it's just a price thing. He's 5'6", and obviously has great weapons with those three receivers and then Charbonnet as a pass catcher. So I get it. They're playing Miami as favorites at home. Dolphins looked awful last week. I think it was mostly offensive. The passing game in particular was brutal for them, but not a great defense overall. Yeah, it's just kind of a cheap stack. If he is the highest owned quarterback on the slate, I will be under the field. I'm not sure why he's popping as the chalk, and I do think that maybe will change before Sunday afternoon, but I think he's fine. I'm getting him a good amount, but it's not something I want to lean into if he's going to be the highest owned quarterback in the highest owned stack.
Yeah, it's a small sample size so far, but through 2 weeks, Miami is the fourth best defense against fantasy quarterbacks. So if that holds, Geno Smith feels all of the trappy to me. It's also Geno Smith. Like it's not like he's like the most reliable guy. Obviously, JSN blew up last week. They still have DK Metcalf. Kenneth Walker could be back. So he's got a decent offense around him. And if Miami puts up points, it could be a shootout, even without Tua. But I just think at that ownership, I will absolutely be fading. I'll just pay $400 more for Brock Purdy, or I'll look for a pivot like Caleb Williams, who everybody's out on, but he absolutely could get it going. And then Justin Fields he was my guy at quarterback last week, did not deliver. He's had like 11 fantasy points in both of his starts this year. The matchup against the Chargers is not ideal, but he's still 5.4K, still is a nice rushing floor. I still think I'm not going to do a flag plant for Fields this time, but I do think he is a really nice pivot off of a chalky Geno Smith. Before we move on to running back, is there anybody else in the punt range sub 5.5K that you have a lot of interest in?
Yeah, the highest owned QB on the slate for me by a mile as of now is Sam Darnold at home against the Texans. Another dome game. There are many dome games on the slate this week, but he's cheap. He's been playing quite well. Justin Jefferson, I think, is going to play. Obviously, if he doesn't, I have less interest in Darnold, but it's just a cheap QB with maybe the top receiver on the slate. I'm happy to play him. And then Jalen Naylor is an okay value in the stacks. Even Johnny Munt as a punt, I think, is fine. I just think it's a pretty good spot for Darnold. And if Geno is the chalk, Darnold is right there for 100 less in a similar spot. I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't mind Darnold at all, actually. And by the way, people may not recall this, but he actually has a really nice rushing floor himself when he gets going. Pretty athletic and mobile quarterback, a little bit underrated in that regard. His downside would be if he's overowned. Right now, he's not projected to be. And if he, has a bunch of turnovers. Because, by the way, the Houston defense, they have not done well against quarterbacks. So as far as that individual matchup goes, he looks pretty good. But in general, their defense is a little bit underrated, I think. They made Caleb Williams look awful last week. But then again, maybe Caleb Williams is just awful. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I like Darnold. Good price. Could be a shootout. 5.5K. He comes in with a fifth best projection of the slate. Reminds me a little bit of Justin Fields last week. Very, very cheap, really good projection, not owned, and a total miss. But I do like him. So I'm okay in that range with like who I said before, Brock Purdy, and then you said Geno Smith. So that's a nice little range where one of those guys has to hit, man. So that's what I'm thinking of. I don't need to pay up a quarterback because there are so many good players to get to. And let's get over to running back and start talking about
a couple of more I want to name. A couple more.
Oh, sure.
QBs.
Go ahead.
Just pure punt skinny stacks. I think Neighbors is going to be pretty popular this week. So playing him with Daniel Jones, I think is okay. Just two giants. Rough spot against the Browns on the road, but they're underdogs. Should have to throw in theory. Jones
that may not be a good thing. That may not be a good thing when it's Daniel Jones.
No, but he can run. Like, it's not that dissimilar to Justin Fields. Not saying he's Justin Fields, but he does have some upside with his legs. And then Minshew at home against Carolina, like, Panthers are a team it looks like we can pick on every week. He's cheap. You can play him with Devontae Adams very easily. Not saying I'm doing it a ton, but I think Minshew is passable as a low on punt.
Yeah, another guy that's worth mentioning, especially if you want to talk about guys who are going to be playing from behind and have dual threat ability, would be rookie Broncos quarterback Bo Nix. He has not been good through 2 starts, but the Buccaneers are not also, stopping quarterbacks who are mobile. Jaden Daniels ran all over them for 88 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground in week 1. So another rookie could have success against him at 5.1K. I think you could do worse as far as a punt. One other guy I will note real quick would be Jordan Love if he ends up playing. I'd be a little weary to commit to him at 6.2K, and the matchup is not amazing. Never mind. I was just kind of checking his price and thinking if Jordan Love comes back, he's got all those weapons, maybe it could be interesting. But Titans are not an easy draw. All right, moving on here. Moving on here to the running backs. Devon Achane comes in with the best overall projection of the slate. Feels a little bit too cheap still at 7.7K or 7K flat. I think Raheem Mostert is due back though. At least he's getting there. He's trending in that direction. So I don't know if that really gets me off of Achane, but he is coming at almost 28% ownership, so we will have to consider that. Right behind him in terms of projection and way ahead of him in ownership is Jordan Mason. As far as the guys up top, I mean, Jordan Mason at 6.2K, that's another lock and load for me. We felt that way about Jordan Mason last week when he was 5.2, and he had 20 fantasy points. That's 2 straight games over 20 fantasy points for him. Only downside with Mason is he's going to be owned, and he doesn't really have a role as a receiver out of the backfield. But I think that obviously could change at any time, especially with Debo not there. He could just get more runs and more opportunities as a receiver too. So Mason is a lock for me at this price. And then let's just talk real quick about the really expensive options here. What other guys? I know you're with me on Mason, but what other guys that are expensive that you feel really good about? Starting with a chalky Achane and then looking at guys like Alvin Kamara and Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I love everything about Achane this week. Without Mostert last week, he played more snaps. I think he had 22 carries, even a game they were losing by a lot for the majority of the night. I think he's just a smash at Seattle. I'll feel less good about that if Mostert is back, but I do still think Achane is in line to be the starter, moving forward regardless. So I'll be playing him. I'll be playing him less if Mostert is in with still a terrific play. Mason, nothing that their favorites against the Rams with their receivers all dying. So even if he's not catching passes, he should be in line for quite a bit of work, assuming they want to kind of burn some clock. Kyron Williams saw fewer snaps last week, but it's because they got the doors off Cardinals, I think. He played over 90% of the snaps in week 1. I see no reason to believe he can't play a similar role if they can keep the game close, but not very confident they can, to be honest. So I'm not really getting to a ton of Kyron this week. Kamara is fine. I'm kind of scared of fading him considering what he did last week. But, do you think it's going to be owned, Kamara, against the Eagles?
It's coming at 16% owned. I don't know. It depends what happens with Achane's ownership. I think just because he's a good amount more expensive than Achane. But yeah, he'll pick up some ownership. I mean, you can't put up 44 fantasy points and not get ownership the next week, especially in a projected shootout. Which, by the way, this is a little surprising to me. The Eagles have not allowed a touchdown to running backs on the year, which I guess we should be noting. But they are giving up the 4th most rushing yards to running backs on the year. So Kamara has not been the most efficient guy over the last 2 years, but he looked plenty efficient last week. And if he does end up being the first running back to score against the Eagles, then he's going to hit. And that's going to be a problem if we're fading. Right now, I am fading, though, because usually you don't repeat massive career performances like that back to back. And this is a pretty huge game for Philly. I just think it's a letdown spot for the Saints, who have looked like gods the first 2 weeks. And I don't know if I really fully buy that personally. So I'll probably be off of them.
Yeah, it's a scary fade, but I get it. It's just kind of, he's getting squeezed. Like if Achane's a thing, Mason will be a thing. It looks like Cam Akers might be a thing. Charbonnet is going to be a thing again this week.
Oh boy.
I don't like it either, but he's 4.7, and Mixon appears to be trending toward being out. Same with Dameon Pierce. So he's going to have a role, and it's a revenge game against Minnesota.
Minnesota's not a good matchup, though. People think Minnesota's a good matchup, but they're not.
I'm not really scared of matchup. If he has a role, he's 4.7. Like, I think it's okay. I'm fine fading him though. Like, Just there's enough else to like at running back.
Yeah.
To where I don't think you have to go all the way down. Charbonnet is still cheap. He's 6K flat.
Yep. Still like him
played
too.
every snap last week. Didn't do a lot. He was kind of bailed out by a touchdown, but got pass catching upside. That's his normal role when Walker's in. I think he got every single carry for the Seahawks last week. So I think Walker, is he confirmed out?
Let me double check because that is obviously pretty massive.
I'm pretty
Kenneth
sure
Walker
he is.
he did not participate in practice yesterday. No practice snaps, so that doesn't bode well.
Yeah,
I don't think
I'm
he's
just
officially
assuming
out,
he's
but I would imagine
Yeah.
he's going to play. By the way, though, Miami has given up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs per game so far. They got crushed
I'm
by James
surprised it's
Cook.
not the most because James Cook had all the points.
I know.
last week.
So honestly, last week I jammed in Mason and Charbonnet without even thinking twice, and I did not feel bad about that. I missed on Kamara, so that was not great. But I never was really considering. You can't really beat yourself up over guys you never were going to play, you know? So those guys were great values then, and their prices have not moved enough. Charbonnet moved up $200, and Mason, who has the Christian McCaffrey role, moved up $1,000. That's not enough. They should both be 7K plus.
They should be, and they're not.
So
Achane should probably be pushing 8K, and he's not. So those three are going to be chalky with good reason. Kyron is another one I played a lot last week. Didn't work out. Let's see. I think if going down a bit further, still some stuff to like, though. Aaron Jones, I think he's got an injury also, but I like the Minnesota stack. Aaron Jones fits pretty easily into that. Occasional pass catching stuff too for him. Don't mind that. And then, I'm not really getting Jonathan Taylor or Josh Jacobs in that game. Jacobs, though, did see all the carries last week with Malik Willis in. And if Willis is in again, I imagine they're going to ride a similar path. The Colts, not a good run defense either, it looks like. Colts are playing the Bears. My bad. Either way, I think Jacobs is fine against Tennessee, given the role. But if Love is back, he might not be as appealing.
Yeah, I think this is where I'm at running back. I mean, I'm not going to ignore value. Like you're talking about Cam Akers at 4.7K. If you're going to get a massive role and the starter's out, and you are a talented player, 4.7K, you can absolutely play Cam Akers. But I would love for him to end up being chalky. That'd make my day because I'm not going to eat that chalk. I think it's like 3 guys for me that I'm really looking at running back, and I'm going to find ways to get more creative at wide receiver and tight end this week. And also Purdy, because I don't think Purdy's going to garner nearly as much ownership as he probably should. Love Achane. If Mostert is in, I'll be less interested in Achane and much more likely to drop down to Mason and Charbonnet as my 2 running backs. And I'm okay with getting all 3 of them in my lineup if I get there. I don't typically love to play 3 running backs, so I would like to have a wide receiver in the flex. But I mean, I'm not fading Mason. I don't want to fade Charbonnet. So right now it's probably Mason and Charbonnet. And then I'll mix in Achane and sub one of those guys out for the most part. It's probably where I'm at running back. Very tight running back pool for me this week, and I'm gonna get different at quarterback and wide receiver probably.
One more name to throw out is Rachaad White, just as a pure Mason Charbonnet pivot. Still played over 70% of the snaps last week. They have an okay matchup against Denver at home. They're pretty big favorites. Should be positive from a game script standpoint, and he's still involved. So I think White could be a little undervalued if Charbonnet and Mason are going to carry tons of ownership in that range.
He always seems undervalued. At 6.1K, I'm totally with you. That's totally fine. I have no problem with that. Not really seeing anybody else as far as like a price standout that I have to play, that I feel compelled to play. A lot of guys have been struggling. A lot of guys are in timeshares. A lot of guys have bad matchups. The only other thing I would consider is if like the Achane Mason ownership is just so egregious that, Kamara, JT, Saquon, these just stud dudes who have massive roles who can blow up. If they're going to be like possibly this week's Alvin Kamara and they just go completely overlooked, that's something you could do and do a pivot over to them. And I think as it stands, probably Saquon would be the guy I'd be most interested in, just because right now he and JT have half the ownership of Alvin. And I think, they all are in like decent enough spots. Barkley and Kamara are in the better spots compared to JT. But yeah, I think Saquon would probably be my play there. But yeah. All right. Is that it for you on running back?
Yeah, nothing else is that appealing.
Okay. Yeah. To me, I think it's like I feel like running back is pretty straightforward. You just got to hope like the chalk, if you eat it, it doesn't bust. All right, so wide receiver is a little bit more complex, especially with some guys banged up. Obviously, you mentioned Debo before. He is out. At wide receiver, Justin Jefferson is on the injury report. Should be fine. Cup is doubtful. AJ Brown is doubtful. Nico Collins had an injury pop up, and he's we don't know. We don't know if he's going to play or not. Puka obviously is still on IR. DK Metcalf has an injury he's dealing with. So all across the board, wide receiver could be very interesting. Starting up top, unowned Justin Jefferson is something I'm very interested in if I can have the funds to get there. So I do really like Justin Jefferson.
Holds, that is egregious. Like,
I know.
That is the best play on the slate by a mile.
I know. And then you have your stack with Darnold. You don't even have to try to get cute with like Jalen Naylor or whatever. Just play Justin Jefferson. I would imagine, because we had something similar that we were talking about last week, and we're like, oh, but that'll probably change. And then it totally did, and it spiked. And then like there's even the Cooper Kupp situation. He looked like such an amazing play. Obviously, he got hurt, but his projected ownership was 26, and it ballooned to 51 in the Million Maker. I was like, come on, dude. So, anyways, in the heart of like Marvin Williams going off last week, we should always be looking at that possible stud wide receiver that nobody is on. Right now, that's Justin Jefferson. I don't think that stays, but just if it does, if we refresh and we get to Saturday and his ownership's like at 10% or lower, I love Jettas.
Either way, I'm going to play him a ton. He's my highest owned receiver. As of now, he's expensive, but doesn't matter. Like there's enough else. Running backs we talked about. If you're playing him with Darnold, nice and cheap, very easy to afford him. I have no qualms. Dome matchup against Houston, totally fine with it.
Yeah, and a lot of these other 8K plus guys look pretty good. Tyreek Hill, he doesn't have his quarterback, so I'm probably not as interested in him as I would be. But he's not going to be owned, and it's still Tyreek Hill, so I don't mind that at all in tournaments. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's banged up, so I don't really want to go eat that chalk if he's going to push like 12% plus ownership. Still in play because Arizona's been giving up production, bottom 10 defense against wide receivers so far this year. And then you have, who's the other one? Oh, CeeDee Lamb. Of course, you can play CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb's coming in under 10% owned. And did he blow up last week? I think he did okay.
He had a touchdown, but not much else.
Okay, well, you just CeeDee Lamb's going to blow it up eventually. 19 last week, 13 the week before, so he's probably gearing up for something big. So if you want to go with those dudes, I don't have a problem with it. I think of that lot, if I'm going to pay all the way up, I think you and I are in agreement. It's going to be Jefferson. Ownership be damned. So breaking away from like the really, really expensive guys in the next tier, starting with like, I guess Devontae Adams at 7.6K. Anybody in the 7K range that really stands out, whether it be ownership, matchup, or projection?
In the 7K range, I guess includes 6,900. Devontae with no AJ Brown going into the Dome to face the Saints. He was the number one guy for them the other night. No reason that should change. Assuming Brown remains out, I think he's a great play again in this one. Nico Collins, to a lesser extent, you mentioned he's got an injury. If he's in, I still think he's got, wide receiver one upside, especially if you want to stack that game with the Minnesota stack we've been talking about. Nico Collins still kind of underpriced relative to what his role may be. Chris Godwin, target machine, 2 touchdowns already. Not sure that'll continue. Not a huge touchdown guy historically, but another good spot against Denver. They're favored. Baker clearly likes to get him the ball, so he's still arguably underpriced for the role he'll play. Going a bit further down, Neighbors, I think he had a 64% target share last week against Washington. Just ridiculous. Can't expect that against Cleveland, a significantly tougher opponent, but he's the number one guy clearly, and they're presumably going to have to throw, like we said, maybe not a good thing, but still cheap enough to where I think you can keep him in your player pool.
Yeah, I mean, Neighbors seems kind of like, generational talent territory. So if you want to play Neighbors, I don't blame you. Probably still not expensive enough given his, potential. Yeah, Chris Godwin, by the way, I actually like Chris Godwin a good amount. I just never feel good about clicking 6.5K Chris Godwin. And you got to think it's in the back of your mind, can he actually keep up this pace? He's like 22 plus fantasy points.
Even if he doesn't score the touchdowns, like the targets should always be there, and it's PPR. So it's
the other thing is, Denver is not an easy matchup, but most of that difficulty comes with Patrick Surtain locking up the number one guy, which, by the way, is Mike Evans. So he's going to be busy with Mike Evans, which probably means Surtain is just going to be there. Godwin's going to be there getting all these targets. So I'm with you on Godwin. I think he's a pretty good play, but I'm majorly with you on Devontae Smith. If AJ Brown is out, which he is doubtful, so I'd imagine that's true. Only downside is keep an eye on the status of Marshawn Lattimore. That is another situation where I do care about the matchup a little bit. If I have Surtain draping my player and I have Lattimore banging him around at the line of scrimmage all day, that is a problem. So I do care about guys like that. When you have the really, really top 5 type cornerbacks going up against your guy, that's not a situation where I want to eat chalk. So if Lattimore plays, 22% owned Devontae Smith becomes less appealing to me for sure. But yeah, I all those guys look good. I would start looking a little bit at guys who have been off to slow starts that could pop off. One guy that really looks good. Well, yeah, Ayuk. Oh, yeah. Yes, Ayuk at what, 6.5?
6.2.
No, 6.2. Great price. Ayuk looks great. He's going to be chalky, but Rams are a great matchup, and no Debo, and he's due. So, yeah, I mean, that narrative, he's due, man. He's got to hit. It is a little bit noisy, but at the same time, like eventually it's gonna work out. I mean, he's too good. So love Ayuk. Also like Chris Olave. That's another possible shootout against the Eagles. Eagles are not a very good pass defense. 3rd most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I mean, it's been Rashid Shaheed like season so far, but that isn't going to keep going. So Olave is eventually going to blow up. So I like him at 6.3. He feels like a value. And to your Nico point, oh, man, Nico's a god. I love watching Nico play. But Nico's banged up. They do have Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. So Nico's not going to feast every single week. So we could play that. I want him to play because then it helps the other guys, number one, but then it keeps the ownership from going to Tank Dell, who I really, really like this week. I think they're going to get him going. Well, he's really cheap, isn't he? He's like 5.2. That's just too cheap for Tank Dell. He's been 3rd in the pecking order basically, but I like him a lot this week. As far as values go, like Tank Dell, who are you eyeing at wide receiver?
Demarcus Robinson with no Cooper Kupp and no Puka. Not guaranteed that he's going to step into a number 1 style target share. Of course, he's Demarcus Robinson, but he's 5K flat. Targets have to go somewhere. They're not going to be running the ball the whole game in theory. So I think he and Tyler Johnson are pretty decent values. Jordan Whittington, if you want to go all the way down to 4.2, I don't think is a terrible punt. Deontay Johnson sounds painful, but he's 4.9. They mercifully benched Bryce Young. They're going into the Dome to face the Raiders, who are not a good defense in spite of what we saw last week. I don't think they're an awful defense, but it's still an exploitable enough spot. He should get the targets. He's 4.9. I'm just going to be playing Deontay Johnson this week, for better or worse, even though I think it stung me multiple times last season. Going back to the well with him. We haven't talked about Seattle, but JSN, I'm not sold that he's like firmly in like above Tyler Lockett in the pecking order already, but we're seeing signs. Obviously, he was a high 1st-round pick. He should be good. He was not good last season, but showed flashes on occasion. Last week was great. He's still only 5.4. Again, they're favored against Miami. I think he and DK are both great plays. You can even make a case for Lockett at 5.1 as a pure JSN pivot, because JSN, I think, is going to be quite a bit more popular. Another punt on my radar, I think will be on everyone's radar, is Jawan Jennings, assuming Debo's out. You're stacking San Francisco. He's super cheap, very easy to get with Purdy and Ayuk. So, there's kind of a lot to like among the cheap receivers on this slate.
Yeah, Jawan Jennings was the guy in my back pocket that I was going to be like, and let's talk about this guy. But you already mentioned him. 4.1K is a little bit too cheap for the guy who's going to slide in. He already played 54% of snaps last week, 49% of snaps the week before. So, like, he's already playing, and now Devo's not going to play probably. So, he looks really, really cool. And especially if you're not going to play Ayuk, that's quite the leverage play on the Ayuk ownership. I think he's still going to be owned. Jennings, nothing owned. So, if that's going to stay the case, I'm definitely going to play Jennings. You mentioned JSN. That's a little bit of a pivot off of a chalkier Tank Dell. 16 targets last week, 12 catches. Not really a touchdown guy so far in his career.
Tank Dell's going to be chalkier than JSN?
Well, so far he is. If Nico's out, he absolutely will be. But here's the other thing. I think the Seattle thing is a little bit trappy. I think obviously JSN's breakout game. Now everyone's going to want to look like a genius and go play him. but Miami's pass defense has been pretty darn good. So small sample size, and you don't know if they're just going to implode without Tua or whatever as a team. But if everybody's stacking Geno with these Seattle wide receivers, I have no problem just going somewhere else, especially if the matchup so far doesn't even look that good. Yeah, as you said, you can kind of do whatever you want with the Rams value guys. I think they're just like, it's a guessing game. Whittington he projects decently. He's a good price. Is he safe? No. But him and Robinson and Tyler Johnson, all these guys are cheap and worth a shot in GPP. Is like absolutely going to be my player pool. I'm not really seeing anybody else that like pops off. You could take a lot of chances on different guys just based off some changes. Like Xavier Legette, if Andy Dalton's going to come in and just like resurrect the Panthers offense, maybe he's interesting.
Even
4.5K.
Thielen's 5K. Like who's to say he's not the guy again, like he was kind of early last year. So
it's impossible. No.
Probably not going to play Dalton, but I think individually Johnson and Thielen are pretty interesting values.
No, and honestly, the Raiders defense is kind of decent too. So that's probably it for me at wide receiver. I don't think we need to go too crazy, too far down.
I think a few more.
Okay, go for it.
We didn't really talk about Amon-Ra, but 8-2, still waiting for him to pop off. Arizona was one of the worst defense, maybe the worst defense in the league last season. Not convinced that they're suddenly good. We saw Buffalo hang like 36 on them in week 1, I think. So
he popped off last week, 25.9. Pretty darn good.
So after
19 targets.
That'll do.
Oh my gosh.
You mentioned Shaheed. He's only 5'3". Like you're kind of relying on the big play, but who's to say it doesn't happen again? He's still affordable. Jordan Addison, if he's in, is only 5'1". I like the Minnesota stack. If Jordan Addison plays, I think that's pretty interesting. If he doesn't, Jalen Naylor for 4.4 steps into that role. Another pretty good value. Quentin Johnson, I didn't want to bring up, but he did score twice last week and generally looks better than he did last season. Could be the number one guy here. He's 4.6. Not going to stack the Chargers, but as a one-off, I don't think he's a terrible, flyer for a touchdown or two.
Yeah, I was going to mention Quentin Johnson just because he's 4.6K and he might be realizing his potential finally. Steelers are not an easy matchup, though, and I still don't really want to flock to Chargers guys when they're a run-heavy team. So, but as far as value goes, 100%, you can play any of these guys that you're talking about just because they have upside and they're cheap.
Keenan Allen, if he plays, is 6'2". I think he had 11 targets in week 1. They're playing the Colts on the road in a dome. So, like I said, it seems like every game is in a dome this week, but I think Keenan Allen is not a bad flyer if he plays.
No, it's totally fine if he's actually healthy because Roma Dunze has not really been that dude so far. Although Caleb Williams has no time to throw, so who even knows if that's going to ever be something that works out. All right, moving on to tight end here. Let's see. George Kittle comes in with the best projection. He's the chalkiest play, obviously, with no Debo. I buy that. If you look at the splits with Debo out the last 2 years, Kittle has absolutely crushed. So nothing about that looks wrong. Let's see how the Rams have been. Rams are second worst against tight end. So honestly, across the board, Kittle's not even that expensive either, 5.7K. I have no problems with Kittle. The only reason why I wouldn't want to go crazy about Kittle is he's going to be chalky. But I don't think I care that much about that. Trey McBride is the second chalkiest tight end, 11.4% owned, facing the Lions, who have been better than the Rams against tight ends. Trey McBride has a good role, but he's a little bit more expensive. I definitely prefer Kittle between the two. Brock Bowers has been a revelation. He is too cheap still at 5.4K. Panthers are third worst against tight ends. Bowers hasn't even scored a touchdown yet, and he's still crushing. He's just been a PPR machine. We know he's an athletic freak. If he can actually score, he's going to blow this price tag away. So I like Bowers as a pivot to those two chalkier options. He's got the third most ownership, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah. So it's not like you're getting a ton less ownership, but a little bit less owned, it saves you more money. One guy that is a little bit interesting to me, though, is going to be Sam Laporta, preseason tight end number 1 overall. And he is 6K, so he's not cheap, but he's cheaper than McBride. And he's not that much more than Kittle, who's going to be like way more owned. Laporta's coming in with 4% ownership. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a little bit banged up. And I mean, Laporta's another one of these, like, he's due guys. Like, he hasn't really done anything yet. So I would not be that shocked if Laporta ended up having a pretty big game. Arizona has been good against tight ends, this year, but historically they've been horrendous against tight ends. Worth noting too, they faced the Bills in week 1 who just spread the ball around. They were not forcing the ball to their tight ends. And then last week they faced the Rams who don't really have a tight end right now. Colby Parkinson, come on. So that could just be a total non-issue, and Laporta could just blow up here. But for the most part, I'm not looking to get cute at tight end. I do love Kittle. He makes the most sense. And then I like Bowers for the value up top. And then Laporta is just a nice tourney play.
Yeah, this position is really fucking bad. Johnny Munt as a punt. I feel horrible about that, though. Like, I don't even want to say it, but he's 3-1.
No, that right there, that's why I only focused on those top 4 guys. Those are I'm keeping my tight end player pool tight. Just want those.
I think you can play Mark Andrews because he's 4-8. Like, we're getting a discount because he's been bad to start the year, but he did look a bit better last week. Outperformed Isaiah Likely, I believe. So for 4-8, I think it's okay, even in a bad matchup. Colby Parkinson is only 3-6. They did lose their top 2 receivers. Ball has to go somewhere. I think he's an okay punt. Ditto for Schoonmaker if Ferguson's out again. Should be the Cowboys starting tight end. Not a great spot against Baltimore, but you're really not playing anything you like at this position.
Actually, by the way, Ferguson is projected to play. Ferguson at 4.5K might be my favorite value at tight end. As far as deep dive, that's too cheap. The Ravens are 4th worst against tight end so far through 2 weeks. So I mean, his backup is totally fine. That's a nice punt at 3.3. But Ferguson's supposed to play. If he plays, he looks pretty good. Not so bad.
I guess.
Well, if you like Luka Schoonmaker or whatever his name is, then you should like Dallas or Jake Ferguson if he's healthy and in there.
If he's healthy, I don't know.
Yeah.
It looked pretty bad when he got hurt. So we'll see.
That's true. Is that it for you at tight end then?
Yeah, fuck that position.
That's true. Yeah. Either way, I think Ferguson's good value. Like you said, Schoonmaker. What's the name? Schoonmaker. Yeah. But for the most part, I'm staying up top at tight end. Defense is a crapshoot, but just tell me if anybody stands out for you this week.
Tampa Bay against Denver. Any team playing Bo Nix is going to be on my radar.
Yeah.
Miami's pretty cheap against a chalky Seattle if you want to punt it. Tennessee against Green Bay, maybe more so if Malik Willis is starting.
There you go.
Indy against the Bears, another rookie QB. And, Cleveland is expensive, but they're playing Daniel Jones, so that's worth a shout.
Yeah, I think Miami is actually a little bit interesting based off the ownership flocking towards the Seattle passing game. I don't mind them as a flyer at 2.5K because honestly, if their offense is not going to be on point, their defense might need to step up. So I wouldn't be that shocked if they had a decent or better than expected game. Bears against Anthony Richardson, who looked like just dog water last week. Chicago defense is pretty decent. Held Texans at 19 points and had 2 defensive scores in week 1. So at 2.6, that's a nice punt. I don't like to pay out for defenses in general, so I'm kind of looking in that range. Other guys, I'm with you on the Titans if Malik Willis plays again. Pretty unlikely to have that kind of game where you just run like 50 times and have success again. So if Jordan Love is out, Titans do look good, even though Packers are my team. Yeah, Tampa Bay against Denver, that's okay. So that's probably where my cutoff is. I don't want to invest more than 3K in a defense. That's just how I roll. All right, man. That is going to do it for us. Hopefully this breakdown helped you out a little bit, kind of geared you towards the plays we really like and helped you out with projections, ownerships, and matchups, all that fun stuff. If it did help you in any way, give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.